Hello and welcome back to the workshop. Today I'm going to be showing you something new I've bought. I've got a No.2 Sweeney and Blocksidge Flypress, which today I'm going to be restoring and getting built a nice stand. So let's get into it. So here is the Flypress itself. It's not in bad condition, but it needs a bit of work. So I'm going to try and get the old mandrel at the bottom out of it, clean the bottom of it, get this all nice and waxed so it's nice and polished, take it all apart. This bit's alright, so we'll leave it how it is. Put some fresh oil on here, degrease it and get the top sorted as well. I then set to work about removing the top handle and then trying to remove the tool clamp. Now as you can see, I didn't actually manage to get this fully off, but I used a socket to free off all the bolts and then started to pick out all the grease and rubbish from the threads. There was a surprising amount of oil and rubbish in the threads, so I'm not convinced that this had been done for a very long time. So what I've done now is I've cleaned off the depth stop and just got it freed off a bit better, so now it does at least move. If I wind the handle back of it, you can see it now moves nice and freely, which is what we want. There's a little bit of binding here, but we are at the bottom of the straight threads, so that's kind of expected. As you can probably see with the pick, I was getting rid of all the clumps of old deposited oil, which looked a bit like that, which was not very pleasant. So I've got rid of all of that, so hopefully this will now be in a bit better condition. Now I'm using some solvent degreaser to degrease all of the old oil out of the threads. So now I'm going to continue to take this back off, clean this up, get the threads nice and clean, and then we'll move on to the next bit. So I then used a combination of solvent degreaser and a toothbrush to clean the threads further. Again, I don't think this had been done for a very long time as there was still quite a lot of rubbish coming out. I then went back to the pick to try and clean it up and then used the toothbrush in combination. I then set to work about removing a stock bolt in the mandrel holder, which I'll go on to show you in a second. Now, what you could see me doing there was very carefully working the bolt that sat in here to clamp the tool very, very carefully back and forth. Now, I'd soaked this in penetrating oil day before today, so yesterday, and a couple of days before that as well, to try and work this bolt, get some oil on it and loosen it. And then very carefully, I've used a combination of the Allen keys and a pair of vice grips, just working the bolt. I didn't want to immediately go straight to the head of the bolt because if I flexed that and sheared it, it would have been game over and I would have had to drill the bolt out and use an extractor. So you can see me on here just gently rocking it, trying to get it to loosen. And then I gently put some pressure on here and I could see the whole face of the bolt was moving. So I thought at that point it had loosened itself. Very carefully turned it and then you could see it start to move. And then once you saw me loosen the nut off the bolt, I could see it was coming out. So went the whole way out and now I have the piece of tooling that someone had made for this out of here. I'm not sure what exactly this was. I then started to work on flattening the bed down and removing any of the high spots of rust. I used a combination of 400, 240 grit and finer grits as well for this. This was just a tedious process, but it was really worth it to make it shine and also just bring back some of that nice surface. So now that's all done, just going to give that a quick polish with some peak, if I've got any. If not, I'll use some Autosol. Then just cut it back a tiny bit, just in any of the rust spots left. And then I'll wax the bed just to ensure it doesn't rust really. I couldn't find any peaks, so I just used Autosol and used a microfiber to rub that on, just giving it a nice shine, before then moving on to using some machine wax, polishing this onto the surface. So to show you the progress from today, we have the bed pretty much clean now. So with most of the Flypress now cleaned up, we're going to turn our attention to the handle. I think I'm going to zip wheel this one rather than sanding it by hand, as it would just take quite some time. So I'm going to whack this probably in a vise or maybe against a block of wood, something like that. You can probably see here it's quite rusty, so I'm going to try and clean this up the best I can. Haven't decided what I'm going to do paint wise yet. I think I'll paint this sort of hammerite black, something like that, and then do the body of the tool maybe green or leave it for now. But let's get on to this first. I then started the process of zip wheeling the flywheel handle. This was quite a long process, but definitely worth it to give a nice surface before painting. As you can probably see, there was a fair amount of paint and rubbish coming off of this. There was probably about 3 different shades of paint on here and quite a lot of rust as well. So as you can see, I've now zip wheeled the entire surface of the handle. It's come out quite nice. Most of the rust is out now. There's quite a lot of casting imperfections in this, but then you'd expect it for something of this size and shape. You can see here what looks like a crack along there is actually just a casting mark, luckily. It does look awfully like a crack, but I have checked and it doesn't look like it propagates any further. Yeah, it looks to me like it's just some sort of casting mark. Now, the original green paint can be seen here in this very corner. quite hard to spot, but I'm going to try and paint the rest of it a dark green like that. There was this beige sort of white colour on it before, so I'm going to clean this all up. I'll leave that there for now just so I've got a reference. Give it one last pass with the zip wheel and then that'll be ready to go on. I then cleaned the internal mating surface of the handle just using a wire brush. So I made my decision with what I'm going to do with the Flypress painting wise. I'm going to strip the old paint off with the zip wheel and then I'm going to repaint it in a nice green colour. There's not much of the original paint, if any, on it apart from on the handle, so I'm not too worried about ruining the originality of it. So I'm going to get to zip wheeling it, remove the worst of it really and any flaky bits, give it a wipe down and then we'll apply some paint really and primer. I then moved on to zip wheeling the entire Flypress. As you can see, this took quite some time, but definitely worth it removing all the old rust and paint. Now it's best just to take your time, make sure you get all the surfaces. If any of the paint was really stuck on, I did leave it as it would give a nice surface for the new paint. So as you can probably see, most of the Flypress is getting there now. Just need to get the last few bits cleaned up and the rust off, and then I'm going to apply some paint. I've got Hammerite Director Rust metal paint. I've gone with Hammer Dark Green and then red to pick out the lettering, the weight ball and the No.2 part on it. So I'm going to continue to zip wheel, then once we've done that, clean up anything else, cure rust it, prime it, then paint it. Okay, so most of the Flypress is now clean. What I've done is zip wheeled it as much as I possibly can to remove all of the rust and rubbish. Then I've used some solvent degreaser and cleaner to get all the rubbish off it. There is still a few bits of surface rust here and there that just I can't really get out. It doesn't have to be perfect because I'm going to be using cure rust on this, which will sort of take place of any of the rust that is on there. It's pretty clean now though. I've got most of the rubbish out of all of the threads as well. So, and also I've used a file to flat off any of the sharp bits off the castings. You can probably see just here and here, there was a couple of sharp bits, so I flattened those off so it's nice and smooth. And now we're going to put some cure rust on it. I'm going to give it about 20 minutes first though, just in case there's any remnants of solvent degreaser, because we don't want it to react with the cure rust. So we're going to apply some cure rust now. I've got it in a little container because you don't want to mix it with the container itself in case there's any rubbish in it. So I'll start up here and hopefully you'll see it should turn a nice blue-black colour. You don't want to put too much of it on as it can leave a bad paint surface. So just painting on. I'm not too worried about getting it everywhere under the threads and things because obviously I'm not going to be painting them. So I'm not going to bother with that part, but I'll get all round where it's actually going to be having a fresh coat of Hammerite paint on it. After all the zip wheeling, it was quite nice to move on to something a bit more enjoyable. So this was me putting the first layer of cure rust onto the Flypress. I only ever did one layer on this as that was all it needed. It turned from the blue to the dark black. Whilst the Hammerite does say that it can be applied directly to metal, I like to use this cure rust just as a precaution. As you can probably see, I've got a few issues here where there's clearly still oil on the Flypress, so it's not absorbing the cure rust in. So what I'll do is I'll let the whole thing dry and then I'll reassess these areas. If they need some more, I will put some solvent degreaser on it and try and get it even cleaner. Unfortunately, it is an oily part here because it's where all of the mechanism sits and all the oil splashes against. So despite my best efforts to remove all the oil, a lot of it is probably ingrained inside of the steel itself. So I may not have much luck getting any out of that, but the paint will go on it fine. It's just the cure rust itself might not fully absorb. Trying to make sure it's thin, as I've also seen issues when it's not applied in a thin enough coat and it can completely ruin the top coat of paint. So just want to make sure all of this is nice and thinly coated. To be honest, that's most of the cure rust in, and actually it looks like the oily areas have absorbed enough of it, so I'm not too worried. It's just the very, very bottoms here where all the oil sits over the years. Actually, in the meantime, we can do the handle because I completely forgot to cure rust this as well. Now, unfortunately, I have painted the top of that, so I'm going to have to find another way to hold this. And I've also remembered I still need to do the heavy weight ball that sits on the top of it. So I think we'll do the whole Flypress first, then we'll do the ball last, as it's a lot smaller and quicker to do. The handle was a bit awkward to do. In hindsight, I should have left it on the Flypress, done it all as one, and then lifted it off to do the bit where it mates to the handle. But in the end, I just held it and just did all of it that I could, and then did the last bit with it on the Flypress. And here you can now see it's gone black, so now we're going to leave it for a few hours and then we'll paint the undercoat on it. So it's been about 3 hours since I painted the Flypress, so now what we're going to do is put some of this rust beater on it. So the Cure Rust will hopefully get rid of any rust. This is effectively like a primer, also protects from rust as well. So what I've done, did one coat of Cure Rust, didn't need another coat because everything went black on it like it should. And then yeah, this is now going to go on. So what I've done is followed the instructions, I've done my Cure Rust on it. Now we're going to use this, put one coat of this on, let it dry overnight, and then I'll do another coat tomorrow, and then we can look at doing a top coat. So let's get on with this. After the Cure Rust, it was very nice to be able to put the first coat of primer on. Now the Hammerite paint goes on quite thick. I didn't thin it down as I thought they would help fill in any of the gaps or casting impurities. After having not painted for quite some time, it was nice just to be able to put some paint on the brush and get to it. It's very satisfying applying the paint and seeing all of the Cure Rust disappear. I'm not going to film the whole section of this, but what I'm going to do now is take some wet and dry 400 grit and sand the surface of this before we put our second coat on. Okay, so I've sanded down the Flypress now, so what I'm going to do is put another coat of the Hammerite beige, well grey, and then we can put the top coat on afterwards. So it's quite hard to see, but what I've done is basically remove all of the shininess to the paint, so I flatted off everything with 400 grit. Now, as I said, we'll put another coat of this rust beater on, let that dry for 6 hours, and then we'll probably just, to be honest, leave it overnight. So I'll have had about 24 hours by the time I come to do the top coat. I then put the second coat of paint on. This was no different from the first, except it goes on a bit nicer as it's got a good key. So the Flypress is now fully sanded down, ready for a top coat, so I'm just going to give it a wipe over the cloth to remove any of the sanding dust, and then we'll move on to putting the top coat on. I haven't done the handle yet as I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing for that, so I'm going to paint the entire casting of this first and then decide what to do with the handle. Now this was the bit I'd been most excited for this entire project, putting the first coat of green on. I'm glad I opted to use this colour as it really suited the era the Flypress was from, and I was very happy with how the paint went on. I used the hammered dark green as I know the Flypress is going to have some casting imperfections and marks, and I thought this would do a good job at hiding any of them. I did try and file away any of the sharp bits or the worst bits of it, but there will always be some just due to the nature of how it's cast. So as you can see, I've now sanded down the entirety of the Flypress, so we're now ready to put our second coat on. Unfortunately it's a bit windy, so I'm going to have to shut the garage door. I've got my lights on, so hopefully I'll do the best job I can, and if I miss anything I'll go back at it tomorrow. Then I moved back to more painting and put the second coat of green on. Now you can see it was the evening now when I was doing this, which isn't ideal for painting. Ideally you want natural light, but I just used the light I had in my hand and made sure I went around all the surfaces and then checked it again in the daylight. Now I've made the decision, finally. I've asked everyone in my family what they think I should do as well because I couldn't decide. I'm going to go red for the handle, green for the spindle, and I think I'm going to do this green now. We're going to see what happens. If I don't like it, I'll rub it back down and redo it, but I think it will look good. I've got Hammerite smooth red, so it looks slightly different to this, but I think it should still look pretty good. I didn't think about putting a hammered red on it, annoyingly, but I think it should look pretty good. We'll give it a go and see what happens and go from there, really. I then put the first coat of red onto the handle. Now as I was applying this, I really couldn't decide if I liked it or not. It did take me quite a lot of convincing and looking at it before I decided I liked it. It did look a lot better once it dried and darkened a bit, and once I'd fully finished all the painting on the Flypress. Well, there it is. I can't decide how I feel about it at the minute. I think I need to see what it looks like when it's dried. If I don't like it, I might put hammered red on it or take it back and do it green. Well, now it's dried, I'm actually really happy with the colour, so I'm going to put a second coat on. We're going to paint the ball green. I was going to polish it perhaps, but it's too pitted in places, so it'll just look rubbish. So I'm going to polish it green, well, paint it green, and if I ever want to polish it, it's pretty easy to do. Off camera, I zip wheeled the ball and applied a coat of Cure Rust, and then I moved on to doing the second coat on the handle. So as you can see, the last thing to do is the ball and then potentially sign out the lettering. So I'm going to put a coat of primer on this now, and then we'll leave it overnight, put another one on in the morning, and then a top coat in the evening, hopefully. So let's put the primer on now. Because of the tapered spline on this, I wasn't really sure how to paint it. I ended up just sitting it on the block of wood and accepted that I'd have a small ring to paint over, as I'd explained in a minute. Now as you can probably see, this is fairly pitted, unfortunately, so hence why I've decided to not polish it. And you can probably also see I'm resting on the base of the ball, which means there will be a small ring where there won't be much paint. So what I'll do is I'll flip it, do the other side in the morning when it's dry, and then put a second coat on so that everything gets covered properly. So we're going to leave that to dry for about, well, overnight, and then look at it again in the morning. So as you can see, I've now mounted the Flypress onto a proper purpose-made stand with strong heavy-duty casters. Unfortunately, I didn't film this as it was hard enough trying to lift the Flypress onto here, and to be honest, I was trying to race to get the stand built and everything else, so I didn't film the stand, plus there's lots of other videos on my channel of making workbenches and things like that. So I've sanded down the ball to 400 grit, and now I'm going to put another coat of primer on and then Day after tomorrow I'll put a top coat on, sand that down, and another top coat the same day, and then that'll pretty much be it. I'll just touch in any little bits that need doing, put a machine wax coating on the bed, put the screws in, and perhaps pick out the lettering on the manufacturer's plate.
I then went and put the second coat of primer onto the ball before following it up with the same hammered dark green that I'd used previously.
Okay, so I've now put the ball on the top and I'm going to leave it to dry for a little bit longer, but it's pretty much dry. So I'm now going to put the bolt into the hole for the depth stop, and I'll put some copperies on it just to ensure that it doesn't seize. So I'm just going to take a bit of the copperies and just gently wipe some onto the threads. This isn't entirely necessary, but I would do it just to keep the threads from seizing, especially if I don't adjust the height on it for a very long time. So I'm just making sure it's thoroughly coated in all the threads. So there's the bolt covered in copperies, now I'm going to put it in.
Once I'd applied copperies to the bolt, I then thread it through both ways just to clear out any of the paint that was in the threads. There wasn't too much, but I wanted just to make sure that it had a nice fit. You can see here that's the first way, and then I flipped it around, did it the second way. I only used the impact driver there just to gently thread it in. I didn't use any force as I didn't want to strip the threads. I then cleaned up any of the excess copperies and just checked that I was happy with the fitment.
So as you can see, I've now put the bolt into this. Now I've not done it up tight. I did it up tight to check it did lock, and now I've done it loose enough that I can still turn this, because at the minute I don't know what I'm going to be using it exactly for. So I've left it at a sensible height where I can easily just turn it with a bit of resistance. Thank you very much for watching the video. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a real privilege turning this Flypress back into something that looks good and will work and be functional. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.